to explain to the people some of the great foundations upon which this nation was built. I think sometimes today that we forget that the liberty that we had, that we enjoyed this day, that the liberty that we had that allows us to stand here and sit here tonight and laugh and have a good time, was purchased because some other men died and paid an incredible price. So as we went to the people, as we went to those who were interested in the cause of Christian liberty this year, we felt that it would be appropriate to share with them one of the great tributes of America, the price that was paid for the flag. Most of us know, I'm sure, the Star-Spangled Banner by heart. At some early age, you went to school. They taught it to you as a matter of rote memory. It's something that when you hear the familiar strains begin to sound, you stand, you sing, it automatically comes forth. Most of us sing that song and never realize what it says. We've never come to the point where we've ever sung it out of meaning rather than duty. We've never come to the point where we realize what the flag means to us. The Star-Spangled Banner is a song that our Congress has memorialized by calling it our national anthem. It's a song that was written by a man by the name of Francis Scott Key. He was, of all things, not a songwriter. He was a lawyer. The American government was engaged in the great fight for the colonies. The thing, could 13 independent states fused into a union that they said was God-breathed, could they survive? As the battle went on, suddenly the casualties grew heavy. Both sides, furious in principle, engaged in conflict and took prisoners. The American government came to Francis Scott Key and said, would you go and try to arrange a prisoner exchange? Could you go and see if you could arrange to have some of our American boys released and brought back to our colonies, to our soil? They said they have a large boat that lies just outside of Fort McHenry near Baltimore. And Mr. Key, in that boat, they have our men, and you'll have to go to them and see if they'll agree to this exchange. Francis Scott Key was authorized by the newly formed government to go and offer one British soldier, one British prisoner for one American, with the hopes that they would agree to that principle. As he made his way to that great boat once on deck, he realized the immensity of its size. He was ushered in the presence of a man who they called an admiral of Her Majesty's fleet. He explained the principle, one soldier for one soldier. They deliberated, they thought, they questioned, and suddenly Francis Scott Key heard what was music to his ears. Yes, sir, we will agree. You may take one soldier off of this boat for every British soldier that you now hold prisoner, who you will give to us in exchange. Francis Scott Key was beside himself. He said with happiness he'd come in all not realizing whether he'd even have a chance to secure the freedom of these boys, and now suddenly he realized he was successful beyond his dreams. And then he realized no one had yet told these boys they would be free. He asked the admiral if he could have the privilege of going below that great ship's deck and telling the boys of their new freedom. The admiral said, why, sure. He made his way to the back of that ship. They unloosed a great, huge board, and they lowered Francis Scott Key into the great bowels of that ship. Then suddenly he saw what he said would never be taken from his mind. There in the dark caverns of that ship, chained to each other, every third one fastened to the floor, held in place, young American boys. Most of them, he said, were broken in body. Some, he was sure, would not live out the night. Men, you're to be free. You're to go home tonight, tomorrow. We're going to reunite you with your loved ones. You're free. We've arranged for an exchange. You men are to be taken from these irons. You're to be restored. Do you hear me? He said they looked at him with glazed eyes. And then they asked a question which positively stymied him in his tracks. Mr. Key, are you telling us that you're going to let us out of here to go home? Yes. Mr. Key, are we to be allowed to fight again? Will they let us fight? What's the matter with you boys? You don't have to go home to fight. Don't you understand something? You've paid too much already. My word, your country can ask no more of you. Look at the price you paid. Listen, you go home. Let us honor you. Let us make you heroes. We want you with your loved ones. We don't want you in the war anymore. Listen, men, for you, the fight is over. The battle's done. Mr. Key, you don't understand. Mr. Key, for us, the battle's not over till the cause is won. Until we've secured what we set out to do. Francis Scott Key was moved. He couldn't believe the spirit of these boys. He made his way out of the great insides of that ship, and he found the admiral. He said, "Sir, I beg you with God's speed, get these boys out of here. Quickly, move with dispatch." Only now, suddenly, the admiral's demeanor has changed. Mr. Key, the release of these boys isn't important anymore. It doesn't really matter what happens to them. Francis Scott Key, gripped with fear, is telling me, "What's the matter? You're not going to renege on your word. You're an officer. In the name of Her Majesty's fleet, you could not, as a gentleman, go back on your commitment and promise to me." No, Mr. Key, I'm not going to go back on my word to you. And Mr. Key, there's not going to be an America tomorrow. It's all over. What are you talking about? It's all over. Mr. Key, come over here. I want you to look at something. As they stood on the port side of that great ship, he said, "Tell me what you see." "I see America." He said, "Right over there, that's Fort McHenry. That's our flag. That's my land. That's the nation I represent today." "Mr. McKee, come over here. Stand to starboard and look out and tell me what you see out here." "I don't know. I don't see anything. All I see is a lot of ocean, just a lot of sky and a lot of water." And listen, Mr. Key, your eyes aren't trained. Look very carefully. Look right where the water meets the sky. Tell me what you see. Are you talking about those little black specks? Is that it? Mr. Key, those little black specks are the British fleet. With the wind at their back, they'll lie anchored here in this fold of bay within a matter of 2 or 3 hours. My government, Mr. Key, has issued an ultimatum to your nation that this folly of independence is over. You're to be subject to Britain. And should you tonight not lay down those things you call the stars and the stripes, that flag of rebellion and insurrection, if that flag does not come down tonight, Mr. Key, our instructions with this fleet are to remove Fort McHenry from the face of the earth. We're literally blasted to the ground. Francis Scott Key said, "Now listen, you're out of your mind. There's nothing at Fort McHenry that's of interest to you. That's manned predominantly by civilians. There's no armament there. There's nothing there. All they keep there is a lot of clothing and quartermaster materials. Leave that fort alone." Mr. McKee, tonight, sir, your flag comes down, or we level that fort. You see that flag over there, Mr. Key, on the rampart? If that flag comes down before the sun sets, we'll leave your nation be, and you'll return to the fold of Great Britain. But if that flag continues to fly, sir, it'll mean insurrection, it'll mean rebellion, it'll mean that you have decided not to honor reason and good sense and just common dignity of man, and we will blow you to the ground. Francis Scott Key sat there and watched as the ships began to come. He watched as they made their way. He began to count 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40. And as the ships in the wind tacked to and fro, he realized he couldn't count them. Suddenly he realized the enormity of that great fleet that was going to set anchor shortly. Now he watches as the gunmen begin to prepare the cannon. He watches as they bring out the sulfur kegs, as they bring out the charge, as they bring out the rams. And suddenly he realizes, my word, what an incredible amount of armament. And he's reminded that no nation on the face of the earth has successfully withstood that fleet. He goes down below now, and he sees the men inside the ship again, the prisoners, and he tells them of what he's seen. of the word of the admiral, of the fact of what's to happen tonight, of the fact of the presence of the fleet, of the fact that the flag is to be lowered, and if it's not, Fort McHenry is doomed. Mr. Key, listen, sir, you got to do this for us. Somehow, you got to tell them not to lower that flag. That flag can't come down tonight, Mr. Key. Listen, boys, don't you understand, son? If that flag doesn't come down, you may never get out of here. You may die rotting here with your bones. You understand? Listen, Mr. Key, doesn't matter what happens to us. What matters is what happens to that flag. Mr. Key, that flag's our colors. That's the flag we followed in the charge. That's the flag we buried our brothers in. That flag's America. Mr. Key, don't you understand? She's God-breathed. You can't let them lower that flag. All will be in vain, Mr. Key. Listen, I can't do anything about it, man. I'm out here. I'm stuck. I'm like you. Listen, Mr. Key, tonight, you gotta let us know where that flag is. Mr. Key, we gotta know. We're chained out here. We can't see light from dark. We don't know when it's day or night. Mr. Key, tonight, you gotta let us know. Listen, there's some cracks in the decking. Mr. Key, those that are not chained to the floor will stand. And you come over and you put your mouth on that decking and you scream at us, Mr. Key. We gotta know. Don't leave us down here tonight without knowing what happened. Francis Scott Key went back up on deck. And as he looked out, there were all the sailors of the fleet, and he said all the eyes were trained on one flag, just furled in the wind. And everybody waited to see if someone would come forward and bring that flag down. He said as the sun began to set, he realized that that huge ball of fire, which would soon signal night with its disappearance, was about to bring darkness. And no man would come forward to lower that flag. The last that he saw was it blowing in the wind, when darkness and quiet settled completely on those ships. And pow! Suddenly there was more noise than he ever heard in his life. Suddenly, all of a sudden, he heard these cannons discharge. Suddenly, he realized that he'd never heard 100 cannons in unison before. He heard the orders. He heard the screams of the men as they moved to handle the hot mantle of the iron. Load, ram, charge, fire! And all of a sudden, he realized, oh, no! America's lost. Let's get stand against that. For an hour and 10 minutes, he watched. And then he heard some screams. Mr. Key! Mr. Key! Do you hear us, Mr. Key? What's happening? Man, he ran over. He put his mouth to that decking and he screamed out, I can't see anything. It's dark, man. There's so much fire. There's so much noise. I can't see. Listen, Mr. Key, listen. Mr. Key, you wait. When those phosphorus bombs explode, we hear them. You'll see a red glare, Mr. Key. You watch. You'll see. And then in a red glare, he saw a flag, still at the top. All through that night, they pounded that flag. And finally, at 3 or 4 in the morning, with all of their armaments spent that they dare load, the men fell into quiet exhaustion and waited for the dawn. Now, as the dawn came, there stood the flag at the top. America that night had not fallen. He made his way now quickly inside that great fort. Once inside, he said he saw no handful of dirt in its original place. All of that huge amount of armament had literally torn that fort apart. And then he saw something which stirred his spirit. That flag on the rampart with all of that armament aimed at it had been hit again and again. And because of the successive beatings, it had dropped. And a patriot, a man whose name we'll never know, whose face you'll never see, ran from a place of safety and and grabbed that flag and held it with his own body. He knew that all of those cannon were aimed at that flag and that pole. But if the colors were down, America was done. He knew he'd die, and he died quickly. Another man who saw what he had done raced from his place, and he too grabbed that flag, and another, until by morning, what he called a cement of human bodies, a mortar, held that flag in place. He took a pen and began to write, "Oh, say, can you see, by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? God bless the patriot. God bless America. May that spirit live tonight. Thank you.
Is the story of the American Revolution. The tale of the early colonists' fight for freedom is relived especially for you. From Fisher-Price.
200 years ago, on a narrow street in Boston, lived a young boy with brown eyes and unruly curls. Sam Maverick was 14. His father was dead. His mother took in boarders to feed herself and her son. Sam was apprenticed to an old ivory turner named Isaac Greenwood, and he worked long, hard hours. One cold, gray morning, Mr. Greenwood sent Sam on an errand to Knox's bookstore. It was March the 5th, 1770. Halfway there, a friend shouted to Sam.
Sam! Hey, Sam! Look! Over there! There's that pretty soldier! The one that knocked down your mother yesterday! I'll get him!
Quickly, Sam packed a snowball, moved closer to the soldier, and threw it. Ha!
Oh! You little... I'll get you! Run, Sam! Run!
Oh, here now! Watch where you're
Sorry,
going.
ma'am. I didn't mean to. Hey, where'd that boy go?
Put away your sword, soldier.
I said, where's that
There's no boy here.
coonskin cow?
The soldier's name was York Evelyn. Heavy-set and cruel, he strode off down the street after Sam. Meanwhile, many blocks away, Henry Knox was tending his bookstore.
Ebenezer Hodge. Good morning. How goes it?
It's cold out there, Henry. A cold, troubled world.
Ebenezer Hodge was a stocky tea merchant with wild green eyes flashing under a shock of iron gray hair. He often stopped to warm his hands by the fire in Henry Knox's cozy bookshop. Young Henry Knox, settling his towering figure on a stool amidst long shelves of dusty books, would listen with a twinkle in his eye to his fiery friend protesting the taxes that were slowing down his business.
Ruining my sales?
England had laid taxes on tea, on sugar, molasses, lace, and paper. The colonies had no control over these taxes. Many feared Parliament would raise the taxes higher and higher. Ebenezer was sure of it.
And who ever heard of a tax that did anything but go up? We'll all end up living like paupers to feed the English king.
Come, Eben. We're Englishmen as well and proud of it.
I'm proud of my business, Henry. And I won't have it fiddled with by a fool in a wig and a crown 3,000 miles away.
Calm down, you blazing patriots.
Wait, Henry. Listen to this. His Majesty's latest. King George III hereby proclaims that only those men designated by the crown will be authorized to sell tea in the colonies. Now, what about that?
This is incredible.
Rank tyranny, I tell you.
Absolutely incredible.
I have a warehouse full of tea. What am I to do with it? I can't drink it myself if I live to be 300 years old.
Surely the king will come to his senses.
Senses? Nonsense. I'd like to drop our good King George in a teapot and boil him till he begged for mercy.
Careful, Eben. British ears are everywhere.
Forget the fool king's spies. I'm a free man, and I'll speak as I think.
Just then, the door burst open, and before them stood Sam Maverick.
Morning, Mr. Knox. Mr. Hodge, mighty cold out.
Been running, Sam boy?
What's going on, Sam?
I came to get some paper for Mr. Greenwood. 3 sheets.
Sam, you're not in trouble, are you?
Oh, no, sir.
Well, here's your paper.
Thanks. I best be off.
Wait, Sam. What about that soldier out there?
Soldier? Oh, no.
Looks like York Evelyn, and he's coming this way.
I thought I'd lost him.
Sam, what's going on?
I knocked his hat off on my way here. It served him right, Mr. Knox. He pushed my...
Gentlemen, shut the door and lower your voice, Mr. Evelyn. Bringing in the cold.
What do you want?
Turn around, boy. You threw that snowball at me, didn't you?
You pushed my mother down.
Come on, I'll learn you to fool with a British soldier.
Leave me alone.
Wait a minute, Evelyn.
What?
Your Captain Harris is just across the street.
Captain Harris?
Shall I call him?
No, don't bother, bookkeeper. I'm finished with him. For now.
All right, then. Get out.
Blasted redcoat.
Listen, Sam, those soldiers are dangerous men. The guns they carry are loaded.
They treat us like...
For your mother's sake, leave them alone.
Yes, sir. Well, I'd best be getting along. So long, Mr. Knox.
Hard times for a boy.
The two men bent to pick up the scattered pile of books.
The science of artillery. How to fire cannons. You read a lot of books on artillery, Henry.
A particular interest of mine, Eben. Do you realize that one cannon can replace 200 men in the field?
No, but I'll take your word for it, Henry. Well, I'd best be going too.
It's a bad day, Eben. There's trouble in the air.
This town's in a tangle, sure enough. Take care, Henry.
Those clouds are heavy as lead.
York Evelyn's superior was Captain William Harris, a kindly man, the son of a minister. He did his best to control the rough men under him. Late that afternoon, he caught sight of Evelyn.
Evelyn? Evelyn!
Yes, sir, Captain Harris.
I've heard bad reports about you, Evelyn.
I ain't done nothing, Captain.
You knocked a woman down.
Oh, zoons, Captain. These streets ain't no wider than cow paths. I couldn't help it.
That's no excuse. These people are British citizens, just like you and me.
Well, this town ain't no British town. Snow, mud streets.
Look around you, Evelyn. It's a beautiful land.
It's starting to snow. Yankee weather.
You have sentry duty at the custom house tonight?
Yeah, me and that wind.
See that you keep out of trouble.
Me keep out of trouble? What about them? Throwing snowballs at me?
No, snowballs never hurt a man, Evelyn.
But these Yankee snowballs, they hurt. Coonskin cowards. I'm going to give them a taste of British lead.
By Jove, you listen to me, Evelyn. We're here to preserve the peace, not to destroy it. Do you understand, Evelyn?
Yes, sir.
Remember my words, Evelyn. Good day.
Peace.
That evening, the snow stopped. Young Sam was having dinner at his friend's house. Henry Knox was reading in his shop. Cold and sullen, York Evelyn paced the shadowy street before the custom house. A lonely street lamp flickered in the wind. Suddenly, 5 dark figures rounded the corner. Evelyn swung to meet them.
Stop! Who goes there?
Looky, a redcoat.
Come on, go home, Yankees.
Get on home yourself, lobsterback.
Oh, yeah? Try and make me.
Hit him with a snowball.
You throw that and I'll... Ow!
Got him!
The fight was attracting attention. People gathered, port toughs, apprentice boys, shopkeepers. Several rushed to the bells in nearby churches, hoping to draw more people, and sent the alarm through the town. A few blocks away, Sam and his friend had finished dinner and were playing marbles.
Hey, listen to them bells. Must be trouble somewhere, Sam. Most likely a fire. Let's go see.
Hey, where you boys going? Sam?
Meanwhile, Henry Knox had settled beside a warm fire, book in hand, when suddenly...
Henry Knox! Yes? Trouble! Come quick! I'll get my coat.
The crowd grew fast. Some just watched. Others pressed forward, throwing snowballs and insults. Evelyn backed up to the custom house steps, priming his gun.
I'm warning you! Get back or I'll fire!
You wouldn't dare. Lobsterman!
You throw that and I'll fire! Ow!
More snowballs! Throw more snowballs!
Just then, the captain of the guard, Captain Preston, marched 7 soldiers through the crowd to the custom house steps.
Soldiers! Prime your muskets and load!
Desperately, Henry Knox pushed to the front of the crowd.
Captain Preston, this crowd is unarmed. Don't let those soldiers fire.
Go on, back Knox! There'll be no firing!
Get out of Boston.
Get back, Yankees, or I'll blast you!
Cowards, put down your guns and fight fair.
At that moment, Knox caught sight of Sam Maverick.
Sam, get out of here. These soldiers may fire at any minute.
Come on, Sam. He's right. Yeah, let's go.
The 2 boys turned to leave, but found themselves trapped by the crowd.
Why don't you fire, redcoat?
Well, maybe I will!
More snowballs!
Yeah! Go right to us, boys!
Come on, fire! You wouldn't dare. Look, over there.
Sam!
They shot Sam Maverick.
Are you all right, Sam?
Poor lad. Let's get him home.
4 men gently lifted the boy and carried him off down the street. Just then, the royal governor of Boston appeared.
It's the governor, Governor Hutchinson.
Make way! Make way! Quiet!
Citizens of Boston, return to your homes.
What about that boy?
You don't care, do you?
These 8 soldiers are under arrest for disobeying orders. They will be tried by the law. Return to your homes and leave justice to the courts. Let us remember, we are Englishmen. I will live and die by the law. Preston, disperse these people.
The disaster that Boston had feared for months had come at last, leaving in its wake shocked and angry people. News of the tragedy in Boston spread like wildfire, and devoted patriots such as the burly silversmith Paul Revere did what they could to fan the flames. Express riders rushed the news from one end of the colonies to the other. Meanwhile, the 7 British soldiers who had fired on the crowd awaited trial in prison. That afternoon, Captain Harris arrived.
At ease, men.
Oh, Captain Harris, what's going to happen to me? Well, me and these other soldiers. I've even heard talk of hanging.
Sit down, Evelyn.
Well, can't you get me out of here?
What about the rest of us?
Evelyn, you killed a man. Maybe that Maverick boy.
Now there's the devil to pay.
But, Captain...
All of Boston is stirred up against you.
Yeah, but the law will protect the British soldier, won't it?
Yes, the law will protect you.
What did I say, boys? We'll lick them yet, the coonskin cowards. Oh, you just shoot off a cannon and watch them run.
Don't be a fool, Evelyn. These Americans will fight you to defend their rights. And if all these troubles come to war, you'll see fighting like you've never seen. Guard, open the door.
You reckon it will come to that? To war? Captain Harris?
Evelyn, don't you realize what you've done?
In the small bookshop on Cow Lane, Henry Knox continued to sell books and late into the night studied long volumes on artillery. For the next 3 years, he watched the colonists' anger grow and grow against the hated tax on tea. The anger became outrage when the British decided to trick the colonists into paying the tax by lowering the price of tea. In December of 1773, 3 ships arrived from England loaded full of the evil weed, as tea was now called in Boston. Furious colonists demanded that it be sent back to England unopened. Governor Hutchinson refused. Finally, on a dark night in December, the Patriots decided to take matters into their own hands. Stocky Sam Adams, most daring of the Patriots, gathered over 100 men. In the dark alley, the men met to disguise themselves as Mohawk Indians. They wrapped themselves in blankets and smeared their faces with soot from the smithy. In the middle stood Henry Knox and Ebenezer Hodge. Finally, Adams gave the word.
Who knows how tea will mingle with salt water? To the harbor, Mohawks!
Meanwhile, the 3 tea ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, floated peacefully beside Griffin's Wharf. A sleepy sentry leaned against a piling, listening to the lapping of the waves. But what was that? The sentry looked up, startled. Down Milk Street, swinging lanterns and hatchets, came a wild-looking crowd of...
Indians! Indians! Come on! Indians!
Indians? In Boston?
I see with my own eyes! Look! Look!
But those aren't Indians.
Greetings, Captain. We've come for tea. Hand over the keys to the hold and nothing else will be disturbed.
This is treason.
Let's have the keys, Captain.
That tea is worth a fortune.
Our liberty is priceless. The keys, Captain. All right, Mohawks, let's get to work.
For 3 hours, the Patriots hauled heavy chests of tea from the holds of the ships, burst them open with tomahawks, and heaved them into the harbor. Near midnight, the last chest was hoisted from the hold and heaved overboard.
Come on, you fishes! Drink to the king!
The colonists had made their move. There was no going back. Henry Knox trudged wearily homeward, face streaked with sweat and charcoal. During the next 2 years, more and more colonists joined the Patriot cause. They trained secretly in old barns and deserted fields, vowing to defend liberty to the death. They were known as the Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty had gathered a secret supply of muskets and gunpowder in Concord, half a day's march from Boston. But British spies soon uncovered their secret. In April 1775, 1,000 British troops silently prepared to march to Concord to seize the hidden weapons. That same evening, on the road to Lexington, A boy named Amos Farnsworth shivered and hunched his massive round shoulders together as he drove the family cart through the fading light. It was just after sunset, and darkness swept across the rosy sky, waking up the stars one by one. He shivered again, thinking of the cozy home he'd left just that morning, remembering his mother's last words to him.
Hurry back tomorrow, son, as soon as you sell the turnips in Lexington. You know how sick your pa is. We can't hardly spare you a day till he's well.
Amos blinked back the tears in his eyes. His father was very sick. The doctor thought he might not live. Finally, he came to Lexington. From one squat, cheery building drifted the warm savor of food. It was Buckman's Inn, where Amos would spend the night. Hesitantly, he pushed open the thick oak door and took a seat at the long wooden table before the fire. He ordered his dinner and sat back shyly. Soon the owner of the tavern, Mr. Buckman, an old friend of Amos's family, who had once lived not far from them, brought him his dinner.
Well, hi, Amos. Good to see you.
Hi, Mr. Buckman.
Here you are. Steak and kidney pie. And a glass of milk, just like you ordered.
Thank you, sir.
Hope everything's all right up in Brandywine County. Say, where's your pa?
Pa's sick. I came down here by myself.
Long trip for a young fellow like you.
Yes, sir. I've been on the road all day.
Just then, a short, wiry man strode up to the table beside Amos. He looked about 60, but his blue eyes sparkled boyishly beneath his shaggy gray eyebrows.
How you doing, Buckman? Say, what are you serving tonight? Milk?
Hi, Jandy. Want you to meet a young friend of mine from Brandywine County, Amos Farnsworth. This is Mr. Janders, Amos.
Pleased to meet you, Mr. Janders.
Call me Jandy, kid. Hey, Buckman, bring me a couple of glasses of ale, will you? One for me, one for the kid.
Mr. Janders, I'm not sure if
come on, kid. Glass of ale never hurt anybody.
But you see, if my pa ever found out...
All right. I don't want to corrupt you. Make that one glass, Buckman.
I'll be glad to. Now, don't you let Jandy here scare you, Amos. He may howl like a wolf, but he's got the heart of a puppy dog.
Meanwhile, in Boston, the British were preparing to march to Concord after the Patriot weapons. 1,000 soldiers had gathered on the banks of the Charles River, ready to cross the river to the road to Concord. But the Patriots had discovered the British plan. Already, Paul Revere was galloping across the countryside, spreading the news.
The British are coming! The British are coming!
Back in Buckman's tavern, Jandy and Amos had begun to talk.
Family.
You really have no home?
My home is where my hat is. It ain't big, but it covers a lot of territory. Hey, Amos, I can see you ain't feeling up to snuff now. Now, what's the matter? You miss your folk?
I sure do. I've never been a...
Listen.
The British are coming!
Sounds like trouble.
Paul Revere.
Listen, I've got important news. The British are on their way to Concord.
Back in Boston, the British Army was being ferried over the Charles. Beneath the starry sky, the long barges slid smoothly across the still river. Among the soldiers was Captain Harris's platoon.
Easy does it, men. Through those oars smoothly. That's it.
While back in Lexington, Buckman's tavern was in an uproar.
So those British are coming, huh?
If we can help it. Men are getting together to stop them.
While Jandy went over to talk to Paul Revere, Mr. Buckman joined Amos in front of the fire.
This is a lot of excitement for you, young fella.
It sure is, Mr. Buckman. British soldiers marching.
Well, they may try to march, but they won't get far. Not if I can help it. It's the duty of every able man to fight this to the bitter end.
Do you think they'll be fighting?
I'm afraid so, son. If they plan to go any further than Lexington, it'll have to be over my dead body.
By daybreak, the British had crossed the Charles River. Through the early morning mist, they marched in bright red columns down the road to Lexington. Beside Henry Fosby, a new recruit from England, marched a soldier who had fired on Americans before, York Evelyn.
What? Hey, these packs weigh a ton.
You know how far we're going, Evelyn?
How do I know? Our officers are fools, marching us out on a cold night like this.
Well, Captain Harris is a good chap. He's as fair as they come.
Just then, Major Pitcairn, the leader of the British expedition, rode up beside Captain Harris.
Yeah, there's a man I like, Major Pitcairn. Oh, Pitt!
He's our best major, ain't he, Al, huh?
Well, Captain Harris, you seem to have a spirited group of lads, huh?
The finest around, Major Pitcairn.
Keep up your spirits, lads. That's a grand night for all Britain, eh? Just smell those apple blossoms. A grand night, huh? What say you, lads?
By now, in Lexington, nearly 100 Minutemen had gathered to fight the British. But about dawn, when the British still hadn't come, the Minutemen decided to go home. Jandy and Mr. Buckman walked back to the tavern.
Well, look at Amos there, curled up by the fire.
I wondered where he was.
Wish I'd been with him. No point shivering out there like we did.
Yeah, seems like it was all a false alarm. I reckon the British aren't coming after all.
But in fact, at this moment, the British were only a mile outside Lexington. Captain Harris was speaking to his soldiers.
Now listen up, men. We're about to pass through a little town called Lexington. Keep in rank. There'll be no fighting. You hear that, Evelyn?
I hears ya.
Stay in step, men. That's it.
At this moment, Buckman was yawning and saying goodnight to Jandy.
Well, it's time to get a little shut-eye. What a night.
Yeah, see you later, Buckman.
British are here. They're coming into town.
What's the devil?
British are coming.
Well, let's get going.
The British were marching into Lexington, led by Major Pitcairn. As Buckman raced out into the street to gather some men together, Jandy shook Amos by the shoulder.
Come on, kid. The British are here.
The British? They've come?
Come on. You got a gun?
Yes, in the cart. Are we gonna fight them?
Well, I'm gonna. How about you, Amos?
Wait, I'm coming with you.
Meanwhile, the British marched into Concord and fanned out to search the homes for the hidden weapons. Evelyn and Fosby were left to guard the Concord Bridge at the far end of town. On the other side of the bridge, angry patriots from all over the countryside began forming.
Look at all them Yanks, Evelyn. You think we should ask Captain Harris for more men?
Oh, they won't try nothing, Henry. Those Yanks are afraid to fight us. You saw what happened at...
Look, Evelyn. They're marching right towards us.
Yeah, oh, listen, Henry. You wait here. I'll go for help.
Evelyn, I can't hold this bridge. Evelyn, come back.
The patriots stormed the bridge, sweeping the panicking British before them. Henry Fosby was shot before he could escape. York Evelyn ran wildly through the streets of Concord, searching for his platoon.
Captain Harris, the Yanks are crossing the bridge.
We know that, Evelyn. We're retreating now. Where's Fosby?
I left it back at the bridge.
Get back in line. All right, men. Let's stay in rank. Forward! March!
Back in Lexington, Amos had sold his vegetables and was returning to the tavern.
Hi, Jandy. I'm back. Jandy, what's wrong?
You hear the news, kid?
No, what?
Buckman. He's dead.
Dad, he was so nice to me.
Before he died, he told his wife he wanted to be buried up in Brandywine County next to his ma and pa. His wife thought she might hitch a ride up there with you. You are still going, aren't you? Of course you know, son. If you won't stay here with us, Buckman's wife could take the cart and the money back to your folks.
Jandy?
Yeah?
Tell her to take the cart. I'm gonna stay here with you. At least for now.
Now, son, there's something else you should know.
What's that?
The British have been run out of Concord. They're heading back this way. As the British marched back to Boston, they were fired on from all sides. Now they were entering Lexington, and York Evelyn was beginning to panic.
Sir, Captain Harris, they got Mr. Ribbons. We'll never be quiet and get in step.
Meanwhile, Jandy and Amos crouched behind a stone wall at the edge of town, watching the British approach. Steady, kid. A little closer. Now! The British passed through Lexington. In the dust lay York, England. In ever-swelling numbers, the Patriots swept the British before them to Boston. That night, the jubilant Patriots set up camp on the hills surrounding Boston. Hundreds of Americans like Amos Farnsworth decided to remain until the British had been driven out of the city. That night, Amos sat by the campfire, gazing into the flickering flames, and thought of home. Home. Only yesterday morning he had said goodbye, but now it seemed ages away. Right now, his ma was probably wondering why he hadn't come back yet, and Luke, his setter, would be waiting by the gate.
Dear Ma, Pa, Annie, and Luke, when I said goodbye to you all, I never would have been brung to believe that I'd be here now, just outside Boston. My arm aches from a gun wound. No, better scratch that out. I miss you all so much. I fought the British today. I hope you're proud of me. I know you all need me on the farm, but I'll send you back all the pay I get. By the time you read this, I reckon you'll know that they killed Mr. Buckman. But that ain't the only reason I gotta fight them. Everyone here is talking about liberty. I reckon that's what I'm fighting for. Tell Luke don't get sad now, 'cause soon as I get back, me and him is going out hunting and get some good quail. I'm in good hands here. Don't worry about me. Your loving son, Amos.
2 months passed. Amos learned the simple companionship of the army, the happiness of a letter from home, that letdown when no letter came. Jandy was elected sergeant of Amos's company. The older man was like a father to him. One night in June, the army was ordered to fortify Bunker Hill, overlooking Boston Harbor. But through a slip-up, the men began digging on Breed's Hill, smaller and less easily defended. All that night, the Patriots dug. At first, they worked in near silence, but as time passed, orders were given to dig as hard and as loud as necessary. In the ghostly gray light, just before dawn, Jandy and Amos worked side by side.
Makes you feel sort of grave, don't it? Hey, kid, what's the matter? You look like you just swallowed your quid.
Oh, nothing.
Confound it, kid. How can you be down in the mouth with a companion like me?
Andy, you really have no family? You really all alone?
Yeah.
I sure wish there was some way of the people back home knowing if I don't make it through today.
Don't worry, you'll make it. Hey, look. Here comes General Prescott. Let's go see what he wants. What's the news, General?
A whole company of country folk have deserted.
Jeez, I was afraid of that. They know we can't defend this little hill. We should go up yonder on Bunker Hill.
You know there was a slip-up, Jandy, and now that the orders have been given...
Orders go hang.
I'm counting on you to keep up my youngster spirit.
I know.
General Clinton was on early morning watch for the British. As he paced back and forth, he was bothered by dull sounds echoing across the harbor. He peered into the mist swirling off the Charles. Then, suddenly, in the first faint light of dawn, he caught the glimmer of a rifle barrel. As he watched in astonishment, the morning light revealed a hillside ringed with defenses and swarming with Yankees. Quickly, he raced to awaken his commander, Thomas Gage.
General, the Yankees have fortified Breed's Hill.
Oh, good morning, Clinton. Yankees what?
They're up on Breed's Hill, sir, just across the harbor. If we move quickly, we can drive them off.
Sun's not even up yet. No point in attacking till we can see their positions more clearly. What,
But, sir, we could easily rout the rebels if we just slip a force around behind them before they're ready.
Oh, really, Clinton? Now, look. We will attack the rebels in broad daylight. The British Army is not a fly-by-night organization. What,
Sir, that could be suicide. If we can't protect the men by an adequate crossfire...
Oh, sit down, Clinton. Here, have some toast. You and Pitcairn always so worried about the men.
By middle morning, the British cannon were bombarding the hill, and a redcoat army had boarded huge barges to float them across the Charles River. Exhausted by the long night of digging, worn down by no food, the Patriots watched the huge pomp of British military might float toward them.
Jandy, look at all the barges. Look at them all.
Just then, Dr. Warren, the most popular Patriot leader, appeared at the lines.
What's that for?
Behind us, kid, look.
Hey, it's Doc Warren, and in a fancy waistcoat.
He ain't only well-dressed, son. He's the best leader we got.
Before attacking, the British ate a picnic lunch at the base of the hill. The officers spread a fine silk tablecloth on the ground and dined elegantly on roast duck and claret. The men ate on the barges. Then they formed their battle lines. At the top, the ragged Patriots waited in tense silence. Suddenly, the British drums rolled, and the neat columns marched straight up the hill.
Hold your fire, kid. Hold your fire.
Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes.
Up the hill marched the British, led by General Howe and Major Pitcairn. Closer and closer they came. When the British were only 10 paces away, the Patriots fired. The red column sagged, fell, and broke wildly down the hill. The jubilant Patriots reloaded their rifles.
We did it! We did it! Easy, easy, kid. Load up again. We ain't licked them yet.
A second time, the British marched up the hill. But again, the Patriot fire drove them back.
Jandy, we've done it! We've won!
Kid, I'm out of ammo. How about yourself?
I'm out too.
I was afraid of that.
What do we do?
If the British break through, walk backwards and stay out of reach of their bayonets.
Once again, the British regrouped behind Howe and Pitcairn and marched up the hill. The Patriots opened fire, but quickly ran out of ammunition, and the British strode into the ditches, muskets blazing and bayonets thrusting.
Jandy, what about you?
Get going, I tell you, I'm going to tell.
Hundreds of Americans like Amos Farnsworth were driven from Bunker Hill that day. 140 were killed. Among the dead was Dr. Joseph Warren. His loss was a tragic blow to the Patriot cause, but the memory of their beloved leader in lace was to stay by many soldiers through the years of war ahead. And already a new leader was on his way from Virginia, chosen by representatives from all the colonies. He was tall, lank, and strong, with a quiet air of authority. His name was George Washington. After taking command, General Washington quickly saw that he needed cannon to drive the British from Boston. Washington soon heard of one man who was an expert on cannon, the bookseller Henry Knox, who had studied books on artillery in his small shop. Washington made Knox his colonel of artillery. And in December 1775, Knox set out across the snow to bring cannon from Fort Ticonderoga, far to the west. Mighty and forbidding, the stone fort frowned out over the frozen waters of Lake Champlain. Knox selected 59 cannon and roped them to huge sleds. Then he gathered oxen and men, a hardy band in coon caps and deerskin leggings. January 1776, the mighty caravan lurched forth. It looked like an impossible task for the former bookseller to drag the huge guns 300 miles through wilderness in the dead of winter. Opposite the town of Albany, Knox brought the caravan to a halt.
All right, men, this is where we'll cross. Remember, take it slow and easy. If one of those oxen falls, he'll crash right through the ice.
Among the men was a grizzled and somber mountaineer known as Long Jake, with a brown ox named Pancake. Jake's eye was quick to see the danger.
Sure don't like the looks of that ice, Henry. This here can will go right through.
There's no better place, Jake. We've got to try it.
Mark my words, it's no good. It's no good.
One by one, the cannon slid across under the sharp gray eyes of Henry Knox. Disaster he knew would come like lightning. It was now late afternoon. Long shadows fell on the ice. 58 cannon had safely crossed. Only one remained, the heaviest and most powerful of all. Jake hitched up Pancake and set out.
Come on, Pancake. Easy now. Easy.
The cannon slid slowly across the creaky ice.
Easy, Pancake. Easy, boy.
Halfway, 3/4 of the way. Suddenly the sled stopped with a jerk.
We caught! Snagged on a log! Stop! Oh, Pancake.
The ice is breaking! Get away from that gun, Jake!
Easy, Pancake. I got you into this. I'll get you out.
Jake grabbed his hunting knife and slashed madly at the lines holding Pancake to the gun.
Leave the animal, man! Save yourself!
The lines parted.
Come on, Pancake. Come on now.
Jake seized the terrified animal by the halter and rushed the last few yards to shore. Close behind, the ice gave way and the cannon fell, just as Jake and Pancake scrambled up the bank.
Jake is safe.
We snagged, Henry.
I saw. It couldn't be helped, but I can't afford to lose that gun.
With extra men and horses from Albany, Knox struggled until dark to save the giant cannon. Finally, early the next morning, they dragged that gun, dripping but unharmed, from the icy riverbed.
The Albany men! We'll christen that gun the Albany in memory of this day.
On they struggled, groaning, cursing, stumbling through 2 grueling months, until finally, late one night, they arrived outside Boston, a ragged and bony crew. Knox rode straight to General Washington.
At your service, General, with 59 cannon.
Well done, Henry.
I think, General, they will allow you to blow those British right out of Boston.
On March the 5th, the very day of the Boston Massacre, 6 years before, General Washington opened fire on Boston from the surrounding hills. Down in Boston, the British were astounded. The British ships and supplies were no longer safe in Boston Harbor, and the town was in turmoil. On March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, the British abandoned the city. In marched the American army amidst a glorious welcome. Washington rode at the head, tall and elegant on a white horse, and beside him rode Henry Knox, eyes twinkling as he looked again on his beloved Boston. It was July 4th, 1776, 4 months after the Americans recaptured Boston. Thomas Jefferson of Virginia had just finished writing the statement proclaiming America's freedom. He called it the Declaration of Independence. Now Jefferson stood before Congress, reading it for their final approval.
When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among them...
Meanwhile, not far outside Boston Harbor, General Gage orders the British ships to head south for New York City. Captain William Harris looks out over the empty gray sea and thinks about his years in America.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Amos Farnsworth, on leave after the victory at Boston, nears his home. It's a hot day. He unbuttons his collar. A dog hears him coming and raises his head.
Luke, it's me, Amos!
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people. It is their right, it is their duty to provide new guards for their future security.
George Washington paces back and forth in his room in Boston. Where will the British attack next? He calls for Henry Knox and orders him to move his cannon to New York City.
We therefore solemnly publish and declare that these are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Information you're about to hear may change your perspective about what it means to be an American. The facts presented are authentic, taken from original manuscripts and personal accounts. Now, let's begin about 360 years ago.
Father, it's been months at sea. I think we must be lost. I'm sick and tired. How long before we see America?
Son, the Lord himself has set our course, so we cannot be lost. As for your condition, well, I find myself a little less than well this day. Have faith, my son, and patience. God will guide us. Listen.
Father! Up above! Could it be?
Land ahead!
Oh, God. Oh, merciful God.
I see land ahead! Land!
What vision did these pilgrims aboard the Mayflower see that brought them to this day? It's November 9th, 1620, and the horizon that was moments earlier filled with nothing but the wind-blown unknown begins to give birth to a new sky. A shore comes into being, and then a scrub pine, and then sandy fields of dune grass. As the vision becomes real, the pilgrims begin to weep with joy, for this is their vision. They have followed it for many years, and this day they will touch that vision for the first time. It's a vision of hope, a vision of love, and a vision of freedom. This is the American vision. And sadly for us, it's a vision which you and I seem to have lost sight of. But perhaps by visiting our past, our sight can be restored.
Her Majesty Queen Isabella will see you now, Senor Columbus.
Ah, Senor Columbus, are you ready for your journey?
Yes, Your Majesty. God is with me this hour. I could not be more ready.
Then, if our Lord should give you his blessing, who am I to deny mine? Godspeed, Columbus. Godspeed.
What was it that led this man, Christopher Columbus, to set sail for unknown lands? Everyone around him with any knowledge of the world was convinced that Columbus would fail. And yet, Columbus was intelligent, seemingly of right mind, certainly an accomplished seaman. Then what would cause a man to start on such a journey?
It was the Lord who put into my mind. I could feel his hand upon me. The fact that it would be possible to sail from here to the Indies. All who heard of my project rejected it with laughter, ridiculing me. There is no question that the inspiration was from the Holy Spirit, because he comforted me with rays of marvelous illumination from the Holy Scriptures. For the execution of the journey to the Indies, I did not make use of intelligence, mathematics, or maps. It is simply the fulfillment of what Isaiah had prophesied. No one should fear to undertake any task in the name of our Savior, if it is just and if the intention is purely for his holy service. The fact that the gospel must still be preached to so many lands in such a short time, this is what convinces me.
Yes, these are the words of Christopher Columbus. They're from his book entitled The Book of Prophecies, and it appears that he could see something that his companions could not. He showed faith where his critics showed fear. When Columbus finally found land, it was a small island in the Bahamas. Imagine the relief of his crew as they set foot on dry land again for the first time in 70 days. And do you know what Columbus did as soon as they had landed? First, he christened the island San Salvador, which means Holy Savior. Then he led his men in prayer. Well, Columbus and his men discovered quite a few islands. And when he finally returned home, Columbus was met with a hero's welcome. The entire city of Barcelona turned out, while a grateful King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella dispatched a special mounted escort and color guard to guide Columbus to their winter palace. The city had been decorated in festive colors for the occasion. The records tell us that when Columbus entered the court of the king and queen, he brought with him tales and proof of lands abundant with spices and gold, and dark-skinned natives who were peaceful and friendly and receptive to the gospel. When King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella heard of these things, they were exceptionally grateful. Grateful enough to thank the one who had opened this door for them. With tears in their eyes, they joined in a song thanking God for the success of the voyage.
We praise thee, O God. We acknowledge thee to be the Lord. All the earth doth worship thee, the Father everlasting. To thee all angels cry aloud, the heavens and all the powers therein.
We praise thee, O God. We acknowledge thee to be the Lord. All the earth doth worship thee. Imagine, here are the king and queen of one of the mightiest nations of their time, publicly praising God and thanking him for his blessings. As we've seen, Christopher Columbus believed he had a mission. In fact, his very name meant the Christ-bearer. He took his name seriously, persisting with his plan to carry the gospel westward, and his voyage opened the door to America. You know, I've been an American for over 60 years, and I'm coming to find out that there's a great deal about this country and how it came to be that I didn't know. You see, history hasn't changed, but somewhere along the way, the real story was put on the shelf as we've passed down America's history through the years. And, at least in most of our schools and textbooks, we've left out God, the very author of history. Why, if it weren't for manuscripts of men like Christopher Columbus or George Washington, we might never have known the true story. So, during the next few minutes, every word you hear from one of our ancestors comes directly from their own personal accounts. Now, let's continue our journey. About the same time America was being discovered, a priest in Germany named Martin Luther was challenging some practices of the Church of Rome. And there were other reformers like John Calvin in Switzerland. Starting in 1517, this wave of Reformation swept across Europe, eventually reaching the shores of England. In 1534, King Henry VIII broke away from the Church of Rome. At that time, England and Spain were the two major world powers, and their rivalry broke into open warfare in 1588. In May of that year, the King of Spain sent his entire armada, 130 ships in all, to conquer England. Now, the English didn't have much of a fighting force in those days, but they did have a powerful ally, the God who answers prayer. The people of England knew the situation would be hopeless if the Spanish landed. They just didn't have the weapons or the army to fight them. So they began praying to God for help. And here's what happened. The Spanish decided to blow the 67 English ships out of the water rather than land their troops. But just about the time the Spanish ships lowered their sails and began to blast away, a gale arose and blew the Armada dangerously close to the shore of Holland. This broke up their formation and allowed the smaller, more maneuverable English ships to move in and set fire to many of the Spanish vessels. Battered by the Atlantic waves and English shot, the Armada was defeated. Holland's government acknowledged God's intervention by striking a coin which said, "Man purposeth, God disposeth, 1588. On one side of the coin is a sinking ship, and the other side shows 4 men on their knees, praying. England was saved. But about the same time, there were a number of Englishmen that disagreed with some of the practices of the Church of England. And by now, with all the countries adopting their own official religions, there wasn't any place for them to go, except the New World, America. 2 groups of Christians in England, the Pilgrims and the Puritans, had the same vision in mind for America, to form a nation where the government would be established according to the Scriptures. They had studied the Bible diligently to find the principles they needed to govern a society. The Pilgrims temporarily took refuge in Holland to escape the persecution they were receiving in England because of their faith. During the next 12 years there, they endured many hardships which prepared them for their trip to come. In September of 1620, 102 hardy souls set sail for America. The Pilgrims were armed with experience in persevering under tough conditions. They also had a good working knowledge of how to apply God's principles to all situations, including civil government. When they left, they fully intended to land in what was then northern Virginia. When unusual wind and weather conditions caused the Mayflower to land several hundred miles north of the area specified in their original charter, those aboard were forced to draw up their own governing charter, the Mayflower Compact. Now, the importance of this Mayflower Compact is that it allowed the Pilgrims to establish a civil government that was based on the laws of God. William Bradford, the governor of their new colony, told us in his diary why they came.
A great hope and inward zeal they had of laying some good foundation, or at least to make some way thereunto, for the propagating and advancing the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in those remote parts of the world. Yea, though they should be but even as stepping stones unto others for the performing of so great a work.
Well, that seems clear enough. But what about this Mayflower Compact? What does it say the Pilgrims came to America for?
Having undertaken for the glory of God, an advancement of the Christian faith, and the honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic.
For the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith. It's obvious that the Pilgrims were here to spread the gospel, but then they were just one small settlement out of many that would spring up in America. What about the others? What does the first charter of Virginia say?
We, greatly commending and graciously accepting of their desires for the furtherance of so noble a work, which may by the providence of Almighty God hereafter tend to the glory of His divine majesty, in propagating of Christian religion to such people as yet live in darkness and miserable ignorance of the true knowledge and worship of God, and may...
Well, I wonder what the colonists in Connecticut had to say. In 1639, they were drawing up their own charter.
On the river of Connecticut, and the lands thereunto adjoining, And well knowing where a people are gathered together, the Word of God requires that to maintain the peace and union of such a people, there should be an orderly and decent government established according to God, to order and dispose of the...
That was the Most Reverend Thomas Hooker reading the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. Just 4 years later, May 19th, 1643 to be exact, several of the colonies decided to get together and draw up a document they called the New England Confederation. It should be interesting to see what they all had in common.
The plantations in combination therewith. Whereas we all came into these parts of America with one and the same end and aim, namely, to advance the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ and to enjoy the liberties of the gospel in purity with peace. And whereas in our...
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get the feeling our government today isn't at all like it started out to be. Anyway, these liberties they were seeking didn't come all at once. In fact, during the first 2 years of the Plymouth colony, the Pilgrims almost starved. Their financial backers in England had insisted that they farm in a communal way. Instead of having private plots of land, the colonists worked together and shared the produce. The Pilgrims believed this system was unbiblical, but they still tried hard to make it work because they felt obligated to follow their original agreement with their financial backers. However, facing their third year of starvation, the elders of Plymouth demanded that the colony institute a biblically based free enterprise system in order to prevent their total destruction. Governor Bradford told us in his diary how the colony then prospered.
It made all hands very industrious, so as much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been by any means the governor or any other would use, and saved him a great deal of trouble and gave far better content. The women now went willingly into the field and took their little ones with them to set corn, which before would allege weakness and inability, who to have compelled would have been thought great tyranny and oppression.
Their obedience to God's principles of individual initiative and private property resulted in God's blessings. Their example led William Bradford to write,
"As one small candle may light 1,000, so the light kindled here has shone unto many, yea, in some sort to our whole nation."
That light did keep on shining, and the nation kept growing and prospering. By 1732, America was made up of 13 colonies. Up until this time, God had blessed the colonies beyond measure. Then, like a slowly dying fire, the spiritual light began to dim. By the mid-1700s, what had been a blazing light had become only a faint glow. It took the breath of God's Spirit to revive our national faith, and that revival was called the Great Awakening. Great Awakening created a sense of national unity. This unity helped foster resistance against the expanding power of the British Parliament. When the time of crisis came, the colonists were ready. That crisis came in April of 1775 when the Revolutionary War began. Over a year of fighting followed before the colonies could formally agree to break their ties with Britain. What a day. July 4th, 1776.
The unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights...
Endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Our forefathers understood that it was God, not man, who was responsible for supplying them with rights, and I'm thankful they believed in those rights enough to fight for them.
And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
As it said there in the Declaration of Independence, colonists fought the Revolutionary War with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. The man chosen to take command of the Continental Army of these new United States believed that the only way they'd win this war was with God's help. The day after General George Washington took charge, he issued the following order to his troops.
The General most earnestly requires and expects a due observance of those articles of war established for the government of the army, which forbid profane cursing, swearing, and drunkenness. And in like manner, he requires and expects of all officers and soldiers not engaged in actual duty a punctual attendance of divine services, to implore the blessing of heaven upon the means used for our safety and defense.
Yes, throughout the war, General Washington and our First Army relied on the blessings of heaven for their safety and defense. In fact, early in the Revolutionary War, the Continental Army should have been defeated. That's right. About the same time the Declaration of Independence was being signed, the British General William Howe was assembling an army on Staten Island. Less than 2 months after the signing, Howe had a well-disciplined fighting force of over 32,000 troops on that island. The British knew that if they could control New York, they would control the Hudson River. In those days, the Hudson split the colonies in half, and if the British could split the colonies in two, they could easily win the war. So our forefathers knew they had a fight on their hands, but they also knew what the Scripture said, that God blesses those who obey him. And just look what happened. This British General Howe had 32,000 men. Our General Washington had barely 8,000, most of them untrained. The Americans were gathered near the town of Brooklyn on the western end of Long Island. The British moved in, and by the 27th of August of 1776, our entire Continental Army was surrounded. It was then that two of the strangest events of the Revolutionary War took place. First, General Howe didn't attack on that day or the next, and to this day, no one knows why he didn't strike when he had an obvious victory. If he had, the war would have been over. Then came an even more unusual event. General Washington knew that to fight would be suicide and surrender was out of the question. The only other way out was to transport 8,000 men across the East River, which is more than a mile wide, without the British hearing or seeing them. That night, as they crossed the East River by small boat, not a sound was heard. But time was against them, and before long the inevitable happened. The sun started to rise, except this day it would mean death for the Americans who had not yet crossed. Major Ben Talmadge, one of the American officers there that morning, described what happened.
As the dawn of the next day approached, those of us who remained in the trenches became very anxious for our own safety. And when the dawn appeared, there were several regiments still on duty. At this time, a very dense fog began to rise out of the ground and off the river, and it seemed to settle in a peculiar manner over both encampments. I recollect this peculiar providential occurrence perfectly well, and so very dense was the atmosphere that I could scarcely discern a man at 6 yards' distance. We tarried until the sun had risen, but the fog remained as dense as ever.
The fog remained until the very last boat carrying General Washington had departed. And then, as suddenly as it came, the fog lifted. When the British saw that the Americans were escaping, they started firing at them. But by that time, Washington's army was out of range. Then Washington and his army thanked God for his divine intervention. It was a blessing of heaven realized.
As you realize by now, the main object is to propagate the gospel, but yet Christians should learn from history. We're to keep our powder dry and to directly go to the Scriptures for advice and wait on God's Spirit to move us in whatever direction we need to go. But propagation of the gospel has always been the emphasis and the priority of any Christian, any time since the dispensation of grace has been given. So let God be true and every man a liar, and truth is only found in the King James Bible, 1611, preserved perfect by God. It is a promise of God. Let every man be a liar, but God be true.